All right, so are you ready to unpack this whole Elon Musk thing in the Trump administration?
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to be interesting. Trump is back in the White House.
Yes.
And, well, as you might expect, he's shaking things up already.
Right.
You've probably heard about this new initiative called DOGE, with Musk leading the charge. And yeah, that name definitely raises an eyebrow. So today we're going to dive deep into what DOGE is really all about, what it's aiming to achieve, and what it could mean for the future of the U.S. government.
It's a really fascinating setup. I mean, DOGE, which stands for the Department of Government Efficiency, isn't a traditional government agency.
Oh, okay.
Think of it more like an elite task force, reporting directly to the White House and the Office of Management and Budget.
So it's not bogged down by all that red tape and bureaucracy?
Yeah.
Seems very intentional.
Indeed. And it gets even more intriguing because this whole operation is on a tight schedule.
Oh, yeah.
They've got until July 4th, 2026 to make their mark.
Wow. July 4th, 2026. That's a hard deadline.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if they chose that date for the symbolism,
Yeah.
almost like a declaration of independence from inefficient government.
It certainly adds like a layer of drama to the whole endeavor. And remember, during the campaign, Musk was talking about identifying, wait for it, $2 trillion
Whoa.
in potential budget cuts.
$2 trillion? I mean, that's not just trimming the fat.
Right.
That's a full-blown liposuction of the federal budget. But how exactly is he going to find those savings? Did he ever specify where the axe might fall?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He's been pretty tight-lipped about which agencies or programs might be on the chopping block, so it's hard to say how feasible his goal is and what the ripple effects might be if he actually tries to pull it off.
Okay, so it's a bit like watching a high-stakes poker game with the entire U.S. government as the pot. And this Trump-Musk alliance just adds another layer of intrigue to it all.
They seem to have gotten pretty chummy over the past few months, right? I mean, there was that X-Space conversation back in August, then Musk started showing up at Trump rallies.
Yeah.
And he even put $100 million into a pro-Trump super PAC.
Right. And it's worth noting that these super PACs can raise unlimited sums of money from corporations and unions, individuals, to spend independently of campaigns. Their emergence has had a pretty significant impact on campaign finance and political influence. But back to your point, this wasn't some sudden bromance. Trump actually promised Musk this DOGE leadership role back in September during an appearance at the Economic Club of New York.
Oh, so this partnership has been brewing behind the scenes for a while.
Yeah.
And that makes you wonder what Musk's endgame is here. I mean, we know he's not afraid to shake things up. Just look at what he did at Twitter, or X, as he renamed it. Remember all those mass layoffs?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he cut the workforce from something like 8,000 employees down to 1,500. And his reasoning was pretty stark, wasn't it? He said something like, if the whole ship sinks, then nobody's got a job.
He's certainly not afraid to make bold decisions, even if they ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, you could say his approach is all about like a relentless pursuit of institutional efficiency.
Yeah.
We saw that at X, where he just slashed costs, experimented with new ways to make money through features like paid blue ticks, and really upended the platform's culture.
Right. But some would argue that those changes came at a cost. Didn't the platform experience some instability? And weren't there some accusations that he was favoring certain users over others?
Yes, there were definitely concerns about censorship and platform manipulation under his leadership. Critics argued that his focus on efficiency came at the expense of, fairness and transparency.
And now he's applying that same mindset to the entire U.S. government.
Right.
That raises some serious questions about potential conflicts of interest. I mean, Musk has a lot riding on deregulation, especially with his companies like Tesla and SpaceX facing scrutiny from various agencies.
That's a valid point.
Right.
For instance, Tesla has been dealing with ongoing pressure from unions to improve working conditions, while SpaceX faced fines from the FAA for safety violations during some of their rocket launches.
So Musk has a vested interest in streamlining regulations that impact his businesses. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that his motives are purely selfish, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. It's worth noting that Musk has been a vocal critic of what he sees as excessive government bureaucracy.
Right.
He argues that it, stifles innovation and hinders progress, especially when it comes to achieving his ambition of colonizing Mars.
Right. The Mars thing, it's almost like he sees earthly regulations as like a roadblock on his cosmic highway.
Yeah.
So maybe this DOGE project is about more than just saving money or helping his businesses. Maybe it's about pushing forward a vision of a leaner, less intrusive government that he believes will, benefit humanity in the long run.
It's certainly possible that his motivations are a mix of self-interest and a genuine belief in the need for smaller government. And remember that limited time frame for DOGE adds a sense of urgency to the whole thing.
Right.
They're not aiming for incremental change. They want to make a big splash in a short amount of time.
It's like they're trying to squeeze a decade's worth of transformation into just a few years. And that makes you wonder, how much influence does Musk really have? I mean, he's not a U.S. citizen, so he can't run for office. But with his DOGE role, he's basically become a power player in Washington.
And his influence extends beyond just policy recommendations. Remember that phone call between Trump and Zelensky after the election? Musk was on that call.
Wow, really? Hadn't heard about that.
It was a closed-door conversation, so the details are still a bit murky. But the fact that Musk was included speaks volumes about his level of access and influence.
So to recap, we've got this unconventional, time-limited task force with an ambitious agenda, maybe a little bit vague. We've got Musk, the efficiency guru, with a track record of both successes and controversies leading the charge. And we've got this intriguing, potentially volatile alliance between Trump and Musk, which adds a whole other layer of complexity to the situation. This is definitely shaping up to be a fascinating deep dive.
Absolutely. And there's still so much to uncover. We've only just scratched the surface of what DOGE might mean for the U.S. government and for the American people. It's crucial to understand that this isn't simply about making government run a little smoother.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental shift
Okay.
in how decisions are made and who holds the reins of power.
Okay, that sounds a little ominous. Can you elaborate on what you mean by shift in power?
Imagine significant decision-making authority being transferred from established government agencies with their years of experience and expertise
Right.
to a temporary advisory body with a very specific,
Okay.
and some might say radical, agenda.
And an agenda driven by someone with a personal stake in the outcome. We can't ignore that fact.
Right.
That Musk stands to benefit directly from deregulation in areas that impact his businesses.
Precisely. Which begs the question, whose interests are truly being served here?
Right.
Is DOGE working for the American people as
Yeah.
a whole? Or is it just primarily serving those who stand to gain financially from its decisions?
That's a question we need to keep front and center as we dig deeper into this whole DOGE experiment. What are the long-term implications if this thing actually succeeds?
Well, one potential consequence
Yeah.
that worries some observers is the impact on our democratic institutions.
Yeah.
If DOGE succeeds in dismantling or significantly weakening key government agencies, it could create a power vacuum.
And who rushes in to fill that vacuum? It's a bit unsettling to think about.
It is. That vacuum could be filled by, unelected individuals or private interests, further eroding the principles of accountability and transparency
Right.
that are supposed to underpin our system of government.
So it's not just about efficiency. It's about a potential shift in how power is distributed.
Right.
And who gets to call the shots. That's a pretty big deal.
It is. And let's not overlook the potential impact on public trust.
Yeah.
The erosion of faith in government institutions is a serious concern, and DOGE's actions could exacerbate that trend.
Yeah.
If people feel like decisions are being made behind closed doors with little regard for their needs or concerns,
Right.
it could further fuel cynicism and disillusionment.
Yeah. It's almost like we're watching a clash of ideologies playing out on a national stage. On one side, you've got the traditional model of government with its checks and balances, its bureaucratic processes, and its emphasis on public service. And on the other side, you have this more entrepreneurial, disruptor-driven approach championed by Musk and his supporters.
And it's unclear which vision will ultimately prevail.
Right.
What we do know is that the outcome of this clash will have profound and lasting consequences for the shape of American society.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, that DOGE actually manages to make these massive cuts to the federal budget. What does that look like in the real world? What are the tangible impacts on everyday Americans?
That's where it gets really interesting and a little bit scary, to be honest. We're not just talking about abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real-world impacts on people's lives.
Right.
The decisions made by DOGE, whether they're successful or not, will have ripple effects across the country and potentially even the world.
So give us some concrete examples. What are some of the potential ripple effects that we should be paying attention to?
Well, for starters, let's look at the potential impact on essential services.
Okay.
If they significantly reduce the budget of agencies like the EPA or the FDA, that could have major implications for environmental protection and public health.
I mean, that's a bit worrying. We're already dealing with climate change
Yeah.
and various health crises. Wouldn't cutting funding to those agencies just make things worse?
It's a legitimate concern. Proponents of these cuts argue that these agencies are bloated and inefficient,
Okay.
and that the private sector can handle many of their functions more effectively. But critics argue that these cuts would undermine crucial safeguards and leave us more vulnerable to environmental disasters and public health emergencies.
So there's a real risk that the pursuit of efficiency could come at the expense of safety and well-being.
Exactly. And that's just one example. We could also talk about the potential impact on education,
Right.
social security, infrastructure, national defense. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
The point is, these cuts won't happen in a vacuum.
Mm.
They will have real-world consequences
Right.
for real people. And those consequences need to be carefully considered.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around, right? There are so many moving parts, so many potential outcomes,
Yeah.
and so much uncertainty about what the future holds.
And that's precisely why it's so crucial to stay informed, to keep asking questions, and to engage in thoughtful discussions about these issues. We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We need to understand what's at stake, weigh the potential benefits and risks, and hold our leaders accountable for the decisions they make.
You mentioned education. Let's talk about that for a moment. During the campaign, Trump and his running mate, Vivek Ramaswamy, were quite vocal about their plans to overhaul the government. Ramaswamy in particular seemed to have some pretty radical ideas.
He did. He talked about dismantling several federal departments altogether,
Well,
including the Department of Education,
okay.
the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and even the FBI.
Whoa, hold on. Getting rid of the FBI.
Yeah.
That seems extreme, even for them. What was their rationale for such a drastic move?
They argued that these agencies are either unnecessary, overly bureaucratic, or infringe on individual liberties. In the case of the FBI, they cited concerns about government overreach and the potential for abuse of power.
But wouldn't dismantling the FBI leave us more vulnerable to crime and terrorism? I mean, they play a crucial role in national security.
That's the debate, isn't it?
Sure.
Proponents of dismantling the FBI argue that its functions could be handled by state and local law enforcement agencies
Right.
or by private security firms.
Right.
They believe that this would lead to a more decentralized, less intrusive approach to law enforcement.
But wouldn't that also lead to less coordination and potentially more inconsistency in how laws are enforced?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a recipe for chaos, to be honest.
It's certainly a controversial proposal.
Yeah.
And it highlights the potential for conflict within DOGE itself.
Okay.
Musk and Ramaswamy might share a desire for smaller government,
Yeah.
but their specific targets and approaches could differ significantly.
So you've got these two strong personalities,
Right.
both with their own visions and agendas,
Mm-hmm.
trying to work together within this incredibly tight time frame.
Mm.
It's a recipe for, well, let's just say it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
It's a dynamic that could either lead to groundbreaking innovation
Right.
or spectacular implosion. Only time will tell which path they'll take.
It's like a political pressure cooker with all these competing ideas and personalities swirling around. And the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, we're not just talking about abstract policy debates here. We're talking about real-world impacts on people's lives.
And those ripple effects could be felt in unexpected ways. Remember, DOGE isn't operating in a vacuum.
Right.
It's part of a larger political landscape, one that's become increasingly polarized and unpredictable.
And that landscape is further complicated by the fact that we have a president who's not afraid to, break with tradition, challenge norms, and embrace unconventional approaches.
Exactly. Trump has shown a willingness to upend established norms and to operate outside the traditional bounds of presidential power.
Yeah.
And he seems to have found a kindred spirit in Musk, who shares his disdain for bureaucracy and his penchant for disruptive innovation.
Let's be honest. Trump has a history of surrounding himself with loyalists, with people who share his worldview,
Right.
and are willing to execute his vision, even if it means bending or breaking the rules.
And in that sense, Musk fits the bill perfectly.
Yeah.
He's been a vocal supporter of Trump, he's aligned with many of his policies, and he's demonstrated a willingness to challenge the status quo, even if it ruffles feathers or creates controversy.
So is DOGE simply a vehicle for Trump to further his own agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a genuine attempt to make the government more efficient, more effective, and more responsive to the needs of the people?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, it might be too early to tell. We'll need to see how DOGE operates, what specific actions it takes,
Yeah.
and what tangible results it produces before
Yeah.
we can make a definitive judgment.
It's like we're all part of this giant experiment, and we don't know what the outcome will be. But one thing is for sure, it's going to be a wild ride.
And a ride that demands our attention. We need to pay close attention to the decisions being made, the power dynamics at play, and the potential consequences for our future. Because whether we like it or not, the choices made by DOGE will have a lasting impact on all of our lives. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day headlines
Right.
and miss the bigger picture. What we're witnessing with DOGE isn't just an efficiency drive, it's a potential paradigm shift
Okay.
in the relationship between government and the people it's meant to serve.
That sounds pretty profound. Unpack that a bit for us. What do you mean by a paradigm shift?
We're looking at a scenario, potentially, where the government shrinks dramatically.
Huh.
Not just in terms of budget, but also in terms of its reach and influence in our daily lives.
So less government intervention, less regulation, more reliance on private enterprise.
Exactly. And that raises a fundamental question about the role of government in a modern society. What are its core responsibilities? What services should it provide? Where's the line between individual freedom and collective responsibility?
Those are big questions. And not easy to answer,
Ah,
but definitely worth exploring as we try to make sense of this whole DOGE experiment.
absolutely. And let's not forget the historical context here.
Right.
I mean, we've seen this kind of push for smaller government before, often driven by a belief that the free market is always the best solution. But history has also shown us that unfettered capitalism can lead to inequality,
Right.
exploitation, and
Yeah.
even market failures that require government intervention to correct.
So the balancing act, right?
Yeah.
Finding that sweet spot between too much government and not enough.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that balance can shift, depending on the circumstances,
Mm.
the needs of the people, the prevailing political winds.
Which brings us back to DOGE. Is this a genuine attempt to strike a new balance, or is it simply a power grab by those who see an opportunity to reshape government in their own image?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. It's likely a combination of factors. A genuine belief in the need for smaller government, a desire to reduce waste and inefficiency, a distrust of traditional bureaucracy, and perhaps even a bit of opportunism and self-interest thrown in for good measure.
It's a complex mix of motivations and makes predicting the outcome even more challenging. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's say, for the sake of argument, the DOGE succeeds in achieving its goals.
Oh.
What does a leaner, more efficient U.S. government look like? And more importantly, how does that impact the lives of everyday Americans?
Well, that depends on how those efficiency gains are achieved. If it's done through smart streamlining, cutting red tape, eliminating redundant programs, it could potentially lead to lower taxes,
Okay.
faster service delivery, and a more responsive government.
That sounds pretty good, actually.
Yes,
Who
yeah.
wouldn't want a government that's less burdensome
Right,
and more efficient?
right. But the devil's in the details. If those cuts come at the expense of essential services, public safety, or environmental protection, then the consequences could be quite severe.
So it's not just about cutting for the sake of cutting. It's about cutting strategically
Right.
and making sure that the essential functions of government are preserved.
Exactly. And that's where the potential for conflict and unintended consequences arises. Different people have different ideas about what constitutes an essential government function.
Right.
And even if everyone agrees on the goals, there's bound to be disagreement about the best way to achieve them.
And let's not forget that DOGE is operating within a highly charged political environment.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there are powerful interests who stand to lose a lot if their pet projects or agencies are targeted for cuts.
That's right. We can expect pushback from those who see DOGE as a threat
Right.
to their power or their livelihoods, and that pushback could take many forms. Legislative challenges,
Yeah.
legal battles, media campaigns, even grassroots protests.
So it's not just a battle of ideas, it's a battle for political survival.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that makes predicting the outcome even more difficult. The success or failure of DOGE will depend not only on the merits of its proposals, but also on its ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Washington politics.
It's a high-stakes game.
Yeah,
And the players are all seasoned veterans.
Yeah.
It'll be fascinating to see who comes out on top.
indeed. And as we watch this drama unfold, it's important to remember that we're not just passive observers, we're citizens. And we have a role to play in shaping the future of our government.
So what can we do? How can we make our voices heard in this process?
First and foremost, we need to stay informed.
Yeah.
We need to understand the issues at stake, the arguments being made, and the potential consequences of the decisions being made.
And we need to engage with our elected officials. We need to let them know what we think, what we care about, what kind of government we want.
Exactly. We need to hold our leaders accountable, demand transparency, and make sure that the decisions being made are truly in the best interests of the people.
So this isn't just a spectator sport. We all have a stake in the outcome of this experiment.
Absolutely. The future of our government and perhaps even our society is being shaped right now. And it's up to all of us to engage in the process and make sure that our voices are heard.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. This whole DOGE situation is incredibly complex, and there's still so much we don't know. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a wild ride. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into DOGE. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.